right, well, thank you, Jess and Amy, both. I think as we think about the presentations and the themes around patient centricity, and also, the quote from Jess about bringing care when and where people need it, I think as we walk through my presentation today, that will be something that's sort of top of mind. So really great panelists to follow and very appreciative. So I'm going to go ahead and try to share my screen now. All right. Well, hello, everybody. My name is Beth Lisogorsky, and I am the Associate Director, Head of Digital for U.S. Patient Services at Takeda. I'm honored to be here today as part of the Innovation and Life Sciences panel with Tiffany, Amy, and Jess to talk to you about something near and dear to my heart. And that is how my organization at Takeda came together in the past year to think through and solve for how to help our patients and their caregivers during an incredibly stressful time. Before I get into the details, however, of how my organization came together and some of the guiding principles considerations, I want to take a step back and talk to you all about our patient-centric approach. And that approach really stems from the core values and how that seeps into all aspects of our company's ethos. Alongside this, I want to share with you what patient services does. Oftentimes, the public isn't aware that manufacturers, pharmaceuticals offer assistance programs for patients and their caregivers, and that is really integral to appreciating the work I'm sharing today. At Takeda, everything we do stems from this quintessential question: how can we do more for our patients? When I first came here over a year ago to Takeda, I couldn't really wrap my head around this boilerplate mission statement. Everybody was saying it. It seemed to be, a pervasive embodiment of the culture at Takeda. And I started to think, is this really something that sticks, right? Is this really foundational? And what I've come to the conclusion is yes, it really is foundational to all the work. And to really be successful, this guidance has to flow from the top down. As a team here at Takeda Patient Services, we're constantly striving to ensure that we think through these key elements. How can we address unmet, unique needs of patients and key stakeholders? How do we continue to elevate the standard of support across all disease states? And how do we continue to really strengthen the connection between the support we provide and Takeda? So I know we've talked about this. It's been a theme here today around, and especially with Jess's presentation, around sort of the panic that ensued in March 2020. Just to paint the picture, obviously, we were all plunged deep into the unknown of a serious pandemic, and some of us really navigating something of this nature for the first time in our lives. We enlisted first and foremost as a patient services team in addressing this crisis, our core values, right? Kind of going back to PTRB, which stands for Patients, Trust, Reputation, and Business. And there's a very intentional design of that cadence and starting with patients, because everything we do starts with our patients and stems down from that to the business. One thing that's important to consider here, it's critical to develop strategic imperatives before putting pen to paper around the design and implementation of models. So you can reference those strategic imperatives often to ensure that you're on course. This was something that was very helpful to us and sort of a guiding North Star as we developed our crisis response. Before we go into how to operationalize a crisis response team, it's important to know who we are and what we do as patient services. We are not commercial marketing. We're not brand marketing. Takeda Patient Services operates in its own organization. We support over 63,000 patients, providing our patients across many therapeutic areas with critical services. Our range of services includes onboarding support. So when it comes to helping patients with financial assistance, copay support, navigating benefits investigations, insurance, treatment delivery and disease education, working with our specialty pharmacies on treatment delivery at site of care, providing educational resources, and giving access to advocacy groups and communities. This is really important for patients. They need to know that they're not alone. They need to have access to others that are like them. They need to understand who they can go to. So providing that level of support, both on our patient services frontline support manager team and also within the community, is key. And last but not least, general ongoing support. So this could include a range of services, helping patients plan for travel. They're going abroad. We have patients that are immunocompromised. This is a big deal, right? They might have to travel with their medication. How can we do that in a way that's helpful to them and provide the right tips and kits and information? Helping to ensure a patient always has continuous access to their medication. Our patients are living with rare disease. We don't want their access to be a limiting factor. We want to make that easier for them. So now that we understand Takeda's core values and what patient services is, I'm going to get into a little bit operationalizing a patient support crisis response, which is what we found ourselves doing in March of last year. This is sort of a shorthand, if you will, in this slide of the considerations and keys to success to consider. First of all, what you will operationalize will vary by crisis type. So in this case, dealing with the pandemic, that specific patient issue presented itself as, feelings of isolation, job loss, financial challenges, right? Thinking through business continuity for programs. Second, the depth and sophistication of your response will vary based on the type of patient services model that's in market for your product and therapeutic area. Now on to the keys to success. First of all, fast mobilization of crisis response team. This was something our patient services team got on right away. We were all aligned around this, breaking through silos and communication barriers, ensuring that we had the right subject matter experts aligned, working cross-functionally and as quickly as possible. I'll talk a little bit more in depth later on about our COVID-19 SWAT team approach. We called it our SWAT team, and it is still ongoing, by the way. Operational agility. Ensure that you have processes and systems, workflows, CRM, that could be phone systems, analytics dashboards that can be flexed for purpose based on the prescribed plan. Cultivating strong partner relationships. Quickly be able to rally your vendor partners into the response to play any necessary role. So this could be your hub vendors, it's specialty pharmacies. For us, it was also our creative agencies. Nurturing a systems thinking mindset. This needs to be driven into the very fabric of your organization. This is a complex ecosystem. Every decision has implications that reverberate through the entire system, both internally and externally. And last but not least, do you have a decision-making algorithm that acts as your North Star under pressurized situations? That's key. For us, we know we can go back to PTRB and sort of understand where we get our value system and be able to operate from a common value place of that within our internal patient services team. So I'm going to read off a quote. This was a quote that was shared by Patients and Purpose, our creative agency and thought partners, and really kind of underscores sort of the challenge presented. And I think this quote came to us via white paper sometime in July of 2020. And for me, I sat with it for a while, kind of thinking around some of the themes we've talked about today. Digital transformation, there's going to be an ushering of change, right? There has been, COVID's been a catalyst for that. How do we see this change unfolding, right? And so I'm going to read the quote and let you guys sit with it for a second or two, and then continue. A crisis often creates the conditions in which people need to adopt new habits. For example, almost a century later, the Great Depression still shapes the way Americans eat. From fortified foods to nutrition labels, the legacy of an early financial crisis that lives on in kitchens across the United States. So not related to COVID, but related to another, really monumental and paramount shift, right, in our country's culture and really shifting the way people behaved and operated, right, for, century to come, right? So kind of understanding that this shift that we were a part of in the last year, we're just sort of on the beginning of it, right? And still we'll kind of see continued change and evolution there. And as I think about this quote, for me, it also equates to how important digital and technology will be for our patients. If I have to think about COVID and where our patients were this past year, disconnected from their communities, potentially they couldn't leave home, going online, potentially getting conflicting guidance, and the importance of what the work that we did within patient services was from a perspective of, folks on the front line acting as their trusted advisor in moments like this, and reinforcing that connection and sense of we are here for you. So just wanted to share that with all of you. It really resonated deeply for me, and I hope that you're able to take away something from it as well. So from the philosophical to the more pragmatic, as a team, when we think about setting up an Agile response team, these were some of the key elements, right? I think first and foremost, aligning on what looked good cross-functionally. That might sound really easy. It's not. It can be a challenge. It's really important to make sure folks from different groups are represented, and we're all sort of nodding our head and understanding what we're judging as good, right? And that included for us folks across our support team, our clinical educators, leadership, field reimbursement teams. The list goes on and on, but that was really critical to success. Creating dashboards. I know I talked a little bit about this earlier, but wanting to make sure that as we are able to evaluate and assess where we're at, we're understanding our data and leveraging our data in ways that make sense. Meeting often and aligning. So this really kind of led us to our cross-functional SWAT team. We, in the beginning of COVID, for a few months, would meet 3 times a week. And then that's quickly, I would say within 6 months or so, that shifted to 2 times a week. And from there, now we still meet monthly, right? And really the purpose being having that representation across roles and function to make sure that we have our ear to the ground and we are listening to what patients are saying and what they need from us. Role definition is really important. I think for us, and credit to my leader on my team, Abby Fisher, she really took, steering a ship, and with her grace led the steering kind of committee for this cross-functional support team. But it has to also be sponsored at the leadership level. And so I think really as we think about the importance of roles, understanding that folks across the table will be at these meetings and communicating their needs and what they're hearing from their vantage points. Communicate to patients using the same set of core talking points. So, whether it's an email, FAQs, leverage for field teams and frontline folks, or talking points, corporate site, the content may vary a little bit in terms of the layout, but ultimately the tone and what you're saying should resonate to a patient from a place of this is a place I can trust, and they're giving me information that's useful and valuable to me. Engaging others often for support and knowing who the experts are, I would say this is critical, right? Because you're not going to have all the answers. And so I really think as we appreciated our team members here and being able to go to folks and get some knowledge and steering in different ways and really having a point person who acts as that person who's able to go to other organizations and seek out information is also really helpful. Conducting debrief meetings to talk through lessons learned and best practices. We've done this a few times, and I think it's really important because you want to make sure you're utilizing the meetings and the people's time in an effective way. Everybody's busy. These folks that we were pulling into these meetings were also talking to patients. We want to make sure that when they're coming to these meetings, we're making them succinct, to the point, and really capturing what we need to capture to make their jobs easier because they're the ones who are supporting the patients. So this is a little bit of like a surgical view, if you will, of what helped make our meetings work. So it's really around defining purpose of these response team meetings. So as we kicked off these meetings, we identified and aligned on goals, right? So identifying trends and patterns of patient questions that are bubbling up by therapeutic area. This is probably the core element of any of these meetings, is just really sitting there going through the leaders in the different therapeutic areas and making sure we're capturing everything they're saying, right? So we can understand, all right, what are the solutions? How do we best support you? Is everything status quo? So I think this was, if we think about these meetings, that was critical. Crystallizing the goals of the first and early kind of proactive communications. This was where we really, in that sort of crisis moment, if I think about our, March, April communications and whether it was email or press releases or corporate site or web announcements, really had to be, and direct mailers as well. We don't want to forget that, even though we're digital. We really had to be smart about the cadence and how we were sending these communications out and timing them. And then, the other piece is flagging any other communications-oriented needs to ensure a robust approach. And that was really, our SWAT team was really the source of that. So out of that, came other needs, FAQs, talking points, and different sort of communications to really make sure that we were addressing and hitting home on what was important to our patients. So this is a sample kind of high-level communications cascade structure. And this was not necessarily ours. I just wanted to point that out. But in wanting to talk to you about thinking around, the importance of print, digital, live channels. In our case, we know we have demographics of patients that aren't necessarily digitally inclined, right? So we often hear we need to make things available over mailers, right? So this is a challenge. And similarly, if we think about some of the socioeconomic factors that Amy shared, right, with the influencer slide, I was thinking, yeah, that actually has a lot on related to the work I do too, because we have folks that aren't able potentially to access, high-speed internet. How do we get to them, right? That's another access issue. So I feel like, obviously there were kind of crisis and touch points as we were looking at our COVID response that we acknowledged, and also solution for how do we do this better, right? But I think ultimately meeting customers where they're at, sort of being the theme. And, depending on the crisis, align as a team on the audience that requires communications at certain points. One thing we noticed was, thought leadership and kind of seeing sort of some of the trends that we were all experiencing as individuals, not patients per se here, but individuals going through COVID, of just email overload, right, and influx. And how do we help not be a contributor for that for people? Because that was a concern of ours. We don't want to overload people. When we do communicate, we want it to be smart communications and something that's of use. So, and most importantly, I think you listen and adapt your planning, right? So I think, having an agile process and response is critical, because you can't, if you don't have that bare bones sort of architecture in place, you're not going to be able to do any of this effectively, right? I think the other thing that came out of, as sort of the pandemic, I don't want to say it died down per se, but as, in the summer months, we took an opportunity, my colleague Jen McAleer and myself within patient services, to educate some of our internal team stakeholders around digital, right? And around how we could potentially look to digitize brochures or collateral or leverage webinars, right? And things like that might not feel like per se the most innovative, transformative stuff, but it's what our patient community needed, and it's what our internal stakeholders who are interfacing with our patient communities needed. So I'm very proud that we were able to meet those needs. And then the other thing I wanted to touch on before I leave this slide, and equally really important, I mentioned a few times that, we're patient-centric, we're focused on the patient. But during this time, we also have to take a step back and focus on ourselves a bit internally too, because to show up and be your best self, you need to make sure that you're well, right? And we were all sort of navigating in this together. And a colleague on my team, Larissa Thomas, she had the wonderful idea of a wellness newsletter. And so she, every 2 weeks, and I was a part of it for a while too, would just sort of, publish via email these like fun getting through the pandemic kind of moments, right? And we'd all take a chuckle and laugh. And, we did have, I'll share a little bit into my best practices and lessons learned, but that's a really critical element, is making sure your team is staying tight and well, so you can support people on the front line during crisis. So best practices, lessons learned. In closing, I just wanted to share with you this slide. I think it's a really helpful kind of encapsulation of a lot of the key points if we think about around sort of a playbook or just a cheat sheet of how to help during a team really come together during crisis, right? Obviously, patient centricity is key. So while everything we did was in support of the patient's needs, ensuring that we're listening to our patients, making their lives easier, which also meant lessening the burden on our support managers that would support them, which in turn meant that the system was flexible enough to account for change management was key. Balancing gravitas and with positivity and lightness, reframing a negative to a positive, but also listening in that state of negative to really be able to help somebody. Close collaboration with legal, regulatory, medical partners was critical. I can't thank those folks enough because they were in the trenches with us, making talking points available for our field teams to talk to patients, making communications be able to kind of go out via email. They were in there with it. And those teams and their ability to be agile make those transformations happen and make them possible. Our agency partners, I think, understanding, bringing them in earlier to, in the journey. I think we brought our folks in pretty early, but just to make sure we are able to benefit from how other companies might be handling the situation and learn from one another. I think that was really key. Integrating cultural competence into communication. So if we think about, diversity, equity, and inclusion, that's something that is a strategic imperative for Takeda, and something as we think about 2021 will only continue to increase in our knowledge and understanding and how we best account for diverse needs of our patient population. Identifying additional ways to consolidate information at scale. I think that's where technology, maybe I'll come next year and talk through that a little bit more once we get there. And ensuring clarity around key program offerings to mitigate against any confusion. So thank you all for your time today. And this work is really a team collaboration. So I'm here representing on behalf of patient services at Takeda, but just want to give a tremendous gratitude for everybody listening today. Deeply appreciative.